Schools are basically closed, so there's no real reason to be on the roads, and we made that clear yesterday. The rate of snowfall is problematic. It's up about 3 inches per hour. 3 inches per hour is basically the point where you can't keep up with it with the plows. But by and large, so far so good, and we'll see how we do as we go through the day.
And you're asking most people to stay home, non-essential state employees being asked to stay home. Mass transportation, is that operating at all on a limited schedule?
Subways, underground subways in New York City are operating. The railroads, Long Island Railroad and Metro North are operating. Metro North we're going to suspend later in the day because Metro North goes to the northern part of the state where the snowfall is heavier. Buses are working in New York City on an intermittent basis depending on the route, but we may also suspend bus service later this morning depending on the snowfall. But there's no real reason to be on the roads. They are dangerous. And when one car gets stuck, Mika, as you know, it makes everything harder for the emergency workers, etc.
All right, Mark Halpern has a question for you.
Governor, while we have you here, I want to ask you about health care, which is obviously a huge issue for your constituents. What is your posture towards the Republican health care bill, and what are you doing to try to counteract its movement through Washington?
Well, you know, Mark, first we have to see what it is. Obviously, the consequences for a state like New York could be devastating. Depending on what they do, we have 3 million people who were insured under Obamacare. What are you going to do with the 3 million people? Medicaid is a very big piece of our budget. They talk about block grants, turning it over to the state. That sounds great. The question is, when they block grant it, do they actually transfer the money? You remember the old expression, passing the buck without passing the bucks. Governor of New York, my fear is the rhetoric of give it back to the states sounds great, but if they give it back to the states and they cut the funding, you put the states in a really terrible situation. So I get the political appeal of repeal Obamacare. But, you know, be careful what you ask for. And a little bit, I think this is the dog that chases the car. What are they going to do? And you have millions and millions of people who are affected, and you could devastate a state budget. I just did my budget. I said, look, I don't have a contingency plan because I don't know what they're going to do. And frankly, they could take an action for which there is no contingency plan. There's been rumors that they could cut the state of New York $2-3 billion. I can't make up $2-3 billion. It would wreak havoc in this state. So it's their move, and I want to see what they come up with.
All right, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, thank you very much for being on this morning. Good luck.
Thanks for having me, Mika.
All right, let's bring in NBC News national correspondent, Mr. Incredulous, Peter Alexander. Peter, your face, when you were listening to Sean Spicer speak, you just looked incredulous. Here you are pressing Spicer on a number of issues yesterday. What did he have to say about the president's claims of being wiretapped, and then we'll run some of it.
Yeah, so the bottom line is we were trying to zero in on this White House a week after Sean Spicer had said that the president's trumps on President Obama wiretapping Trump Tower, and then candidate Trump perhaps at the time spoke for themselves. Yesterday they sort of basically said that the President Trump, didn't mean wiretapping specifically when he was tweeting about wiretapping, that he was talking about it more broadly in general. Here's part of my exchange with the press secretary, Sean Spicer, yesterday, trying to give itself a little bit of wiggle room on this issue.
He doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally. I think, but I think there's no question that the Obama administration, that there were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. That is a widely reported activity that occurred back then. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities during that.
Can you say affirmatively that whenever the president says something, we can trust it to be real?
If he's not joking, of course. Every time that he speaks authoritatively, he's speaking as president of the United States.
So what I was trying to pin Spicer down on there was the fact that last week when we were talking about the jobs report, Sean Spicer basically quoted the president. He said that the president said the numbers may have been phony back then, but it's very real right now. So the question I was asking him is, when can we as journalists, but more broadly as Americans, know that the president is speaking literally, means what he says? I was asking specifically about this issue of the wiretapping, but I thought it applied, and I asked him about other issues like the claim from President Trump that's still unfounded that more than 3 million Americans voted illegally during the election. Worth noting, the Justice Department missed its deadline to turn over any related materials as part of this review into whether or not President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. That has been extended, we are told. They're hoping to get that information. The committee is by next week. That's the same date as its Russia hearing. Mika?
All right, so as a journalist, you honestly, you can't tell whether the president's serious or lying.
Yeah, it's not even, I think, so much as a journalist as it is as Americans. The question is that words matter, and when the president says, well, I was joking then, but I'm serious now, how do you know when he's being serious and when he's joking? As Sean Spicer said, well, he's serious when he's not joking. So I think it puts a lot of people, not just in this country, but frankly around the world as we go forward in a tough position, trying to sort of interpret the words of President Trump.
NBC's Peter Alexander.